So we're going to talk about how do you set the bar, what great looks like on your team, and really enforce and drive that forward. And either through hiring or through coaching and up leveling, how do you make sure that you have a high performance sales team that can get the job done in 2024? So really excited. We have a special group today. Maybe we'll go through for some intros in a second as people jump on. Clear people are just still coming in. We'll give it maybe to 5 minutes after as everyone gets their follow-up notes out right away after the call. The good best practice there. But maybe we'll start and go around really quick. Do some intros. So I'm Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord, career seller, and obsessed with the idea of how do you up level the team and set what great looks like and really coach to that and enforce that across the company. Maybe we'll go around here. I'll pass it to Pat next to do a quick intro. Also icebreaker as well, which you got to add to the chat. Who you are, where you're working, and let's add in, sorry, what was it? It was your least favorite pizza topping was the recommendation for today's icebreaker. So my least favorite pizza topping, probably olives. Yeah, not for me, but this might be a controversial icebreaker. But yeah, Pat, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Ross, it's not controversial with me. I'm on a lifelong campaign against black olives on pizza. So hopefully we're not going to stir up a hornet's nest here in the chat. But hey, y'all, I'm Pat Morrell, currently in Dallas at a conference in the vertical we sell into. We are a vertical software company focused on the CPA profession. We sell accounts receivable automation software to the country's biggest CPA firms. So life on the road, typical for, I'm sure, a lot of us, but our home for me is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm a career software entrepreneur founder. This is my second kind of vertical software business with my co-founder, Justin, who's our CEO. And I've always worn the CRO hat. So all things growth here at Iwan flow through me.
Amazing. Thanks, Pat. And I'll pass things over to Kojo, who's filling in for Tahir at taking the call, but excited to have not just a sales leader perspective, but actually an investor perspective. I was joking before all of our bosses here. So I think in terms of what great sales execution looks like, the good and the bad, I think Kojo will have an interesting impression of that. But yeah, I'll pass the mic over to you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite, Ross. I'm Kojo. I'm a partner at Matrix. We're an early stage venture capital firm. We partnered with Ross and the Accord team for a while now. We led your Series A. I am based in New York. We've got teams in San Francisco and Boston, and we've got companies all over North America. I will say I really think there should be no argument about pineapple on pizza because it just should not belong on pizza at all. So I'm going to pick that as my icebreaker answer.
Awesome. And appreciate you jumping on last minute here. And Jim, to round us out.
So Jim Lamb, I manage the Canadian division for NetApp. And I spent the previous 12 years, I managed the Google Cloud division here in Canada as well. Where I am today, actually, I stepped out of this. We were doing account and territory planning today. So quite apropos, and I've been working with Ross actually to try to help me formalize that process within our business unit, because I think as we've all seen through our history, account planning or planning becomes a once a year thing. And I'm a big believer in, hey, it's not the plan that's important. It is the planning, and perpetual planning, perpetual kind of thinking is something that I just think is just fundamental to a great sales team. That being said, black olives on pizza must be the most ridiculous thing ever. And it completely takes over the taste of the pizza. So therefore you can't even get to the pineapple. But so I'm thinking black olives, number one, green olives, number two. So those are my ask.
Thank you, Jim, and appreciate you jumping out of the planning to kind of share some of your learnings. But I figured maybe to start before we get into details, let's kind of anchor on what does high performance mean to you when it comes to sales teams? Maybe we'll run it back, but I think, before we get into the details of, hiring and coaching and templates and all that good stuff, like, how do you know what high performance looks like, and what does that mean on a day-to-day basis as a sales leader? Maybe we'll go in reverse order. Jim, if you want to kick things off.
I mean, I think the first thing that springs to mind when you ask a question like that, Ross, is trust. I can trust that team is doing what they need to do in order to be successful, both within the company and within their customer base. And I'm a big kind of believer in kind of sports analogies, and I used to coach a lot of hockey when I was younger, and my kids were younger. But you hear it all the time. It doesn't matter what the sport is, but coaches will put certain people on the field or on the pitch or on the ice at a time of the game when they need to trust them. And so I think the first thing I look at from a high performing sales team is one that I can trust that they're doing everything they can to be successful. That's the first thing. Second thing I would think is there's autonomy, right? They work independently. They have a curiosity about the company. They have a curiosity about the technology that they then take forward, and they develop an opinion which they're then able to espouse to their customers that differentiates them vis-a-vis their competitors. Because we're not only competing, my company is not only competing against another company. When you really think about it, especially in a mature market, it's a sales team is competing against another sales team, and a sales process and a sales methodology is competing against another sales process and sales methodology. And then the third thing I would say is a bias to action. I'm a big believer in you taking the first step. I'm a big believer in being on your front foot in a sales call and being on your front foot in an opportunity, and be thoughtful in your representation of your company and your value proposition to your customers. So those are what I would look at as kind of a great sales work from or sales team for me.
Totally. I think maybe to recap, that sounds like a lot of being proactive, kind of a theme that I feel there, right? Not just waiting for them to tell you what to do, but conviction and kind of how we work with our customers. Kojo, how about yourself?
Maybe I'll take a bit more of a macro perspective, and I'll try to connect it to sort of day to day what it looks like for sales leaders. If you look at what the markets were doing in the last 5 years or so in a low interest rate environment, you are rewarded a lot for growth, right? So you can think of that as you are rewarded for just closing a deal. It didn't matter how you closed the deal. You closed the deal, you had some top line revenue, and that was a good thing. If you look at what's happening today in a high interest rate environment, it's not enough to just close a deal. It's important to close a deal efficiently. So the definition of excellence, which I think becomes more salient today, is how are you finding ways to bringing the same amount of revenue in a more efficient way? How are you using tools and processes and systems to intelligently bring customers along the sales journey and convert those customers in a way where you're not burning $1 to make $1 or burning $2 to make $1, but you're running a very efficient sales org. So I think that's something that in a day-to-day for sales leaders, at least that we see, looks a lot like questioning the systems and the processes and the tools that you're using to get your work done today.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective. And it's kind of like the pressure and sales leaders kind of twofold. One, it's harder to close the deal. Two, you kind of need to spend fewer resources than you were before closing that deal. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And again, why having a really high performance, high impact team is super important. Pat, to round things out, what does great look like for sales teams to you?
So first, I'll echo. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that's been said to this point. Particularly, Jim, your comment on trust, and it is it's one of those where it is a qualitative. It's a feeling, and when you see it, kind of like I know And it's what he's top of mind because he's sitting right over there. We're at a conference together. One of our enterprise sales leaders, Jason, he's fantastic. I trust I could parachute him in anywhere. I just know he's gonna know how to operate. What's nice about sales, talking about high performance, it's all quantitative, right? So it's like the measure of high performance is, do we hit the operating plan? And that's and I'm a pretty simple guy, and like things are binary. You hit it or you don't. And as long as you're hitting it, you can start to work on the things that can. Kojo, I love your point. I'm obsessed about efficiency and predictability. My job, the charge from our CEO is, it's not just you got to hit the operating plan. You got to continually, Ross, to your point, do it with increasing efficiency, and we got to be able to plan in advance. I mean, we're a Series A round company, growing really quickly, and one of our challenges is we'll have these massive spikes of growth, and then maybe it plateaus, and we'll spike, and we're finding our sea legs as we go to market. But what's been exciting is as we've matured, we've gotten more predictable. It feels less insane, and so I'm constantly balancing. Well, hitting the op plan is number one, and then number two, high performance is reflected when, frankly, it just feels like we're more of a predictable machine than like a frenetic group of people running around. It's like anything else. It's a mix of the qualitative and the quantitative. But if you ain't hitting the number, it doesn't matter how good it feels, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good, straightforward, and the hardest thing and one of the best things about sales is it's black and white, right? The hardest thing is there's never a day where you don't think about the number. But the best thing is it's simple, and simple doesn't mean easy. But no, that's I think helpful point of view from everyone here with a slightly different lens. Shifting gears to actually getting this done. I think a lot of people are either listening live or the recording because they're curious how other people are doing this today. How are other people kind of making changes? Because I think everyone agrees that you can't continue to do the same thing that won for the last decade. How are you setting the bar today in terms of what great looks like for your sales team, in terms of building that predictable, consistent sales process, partner with customers, and making it easy for them to take a bet on a change? So and then maybe part two of that, we'll talk about how do you actually enforce that, but maybe first step is how do you share those expectations of what great looks like across your team, so those expectations are really clear. Maybe we'll go in reverse order again if Pat, you want to kick things off with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I may have a bit of a, not myopic, but like a very tactical view, because I'm one of the co-founders in CRO, and the irony being I was quote CRO before we had any revenue. So take that for what it's worth. But so how do we kind of build and set the baseline and then enforce it? I think you build and set it by one, leading by example. I mean, for me, I had to design our whole go-to-market methodology. How do we find customers? How do we build credibility? How do we get customer number one? And that was dramatically different than how we get customer 10, how we got customer 100. And now we're at that level of scale. So I'm a neurotic documentation guy. And even when it was just me, I had a Google Doc with the IWIN rules of the road. This is how we sell. And it's a step-by-step. And we're a HubSpot CRM, and Ross, this, we're working with you guys now, and I'm really stoked about what your tool is going to allow us to do from an enablement and a governance standpoint. But you basically design the box that says this is what is best in class. You train your salespeople on it. We do a lot of Loom tutorials. We record all of our calls, obviously. And then it's just a constant cycle of, hey, there's the IWIN way. There's, this is the way we do it, rules of the road. Any deviation from that may be acceptable, but we got to understand the why. And then obviously if there's routinized deviation, that becomes something that people need to get coached out of it and adapt, or they can't be on the bus anymore. Because I'm a very process-minded person, and I do fundamentally believe sales, when done right, is a very conscientious, thoughtful, problem-solving process. And you gotta know what best in class is. You got to define the process to then reinforce it. So put it on paper.
Totally. And it's funny, I used to think that the more you documented, the more you had scripted, all that stuff was like, oh, that's for people that aren't great at sales and the craft of it. Oh, like that's, it's so cookie cutter. But I think as I got further in my career in sales, I realized that having that stuff dialed and, like sports, like just muscle memory allows you to focus on the creative stuff with the customer. And it's actually the opposite. It's like the more structured you are, the actually more present you can be with your client and figure out uniquely what works for them, like you were saying, around those core set of rules. And I think the best leaders that I talk to have the most well-documented stuff, but have the most creative players who can build and, play within, if you're a basketball fan, like the structured offense, like you can play within that. And that's, I think, the kind of, not obvious, I think, for earlier career sellers and sales leaders. Yeah.
Well, just
Kojo,
to
I know.
double click on that.
Go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we just brought on a new VP of marketing, and the kindest compliment she could give is when she said, "Man, you guys have a lot of documentation," and that just made me thrilled because that it greases the wheels for folks onboarding. It just sets a baseline. So yeah, we are of like mind there for sure.
Awesome. And Kojo, how does this fit into when you think about, you obviously aren't day to day on every deal in your portfolio companies, but when you think about what makes you feel and build the trust with a CRO or VP in a portfolio company, what does great look like when you think about them setting expectations for their team?
I think the people comment that Pat made is very critical. I think, if you've got a great CRO and a great VP of sales, you can trust that it will recruit out of great people. So that's sort of step one. One of the things that I've become very excited about are sales leaders that leave some room for experimentation. And so the structure that you both discussed, I think, is super important. And I think, ironically, the structure allows you to pick parts of your sales stack or parts of your sales processes where you allow room for experimentation. I think the best experimentation often looks like bottoms-up experimentation, where you set some expectation that SDRs or AEs or whoever is sort of bringing in new ideas. I've seen some folks make that an explicit requirement, which is, what did you do differently this quarter, or what are you doing on the margin that's moving the needle for you? I think this is a great time for sales teams to be experimenting because it's a big shift from the sort of classic CRM sort of systems of record to systems of action, where you're not just putting data into a CRM or sort of operationalizing some workflow that's all about putting data into a CRM, but actually your CRMs are getting more intelligent. There are tons of tools on the market that allow you to be more intelligent. Even as someone whose job it is to stay on top of all these tools from an investment perspective, I still constantly I'm surprised by the amount and pace of innovation that is happening. And so I think setting an expectation and having some mind share or just kind of mental budget go to, hey, what are we seeing out there that could help us innovate and sell better and move faster? I think is critical when I see a CRO or VP of sales that's sort of setting that as an expectation for the team. I'm always very, very excited about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that the truth is on the field, and yeah, your top sellers are probably the ones that are come up with the best ideas. But yeah, Jim, how do you think about setting the bar with your team of what great looks like?
I think Pat just said it a little bit, and setting example, like leading by an example is one. And then I'm a firm believer in, you set the guardrails, you set the parameters, and you set the expectations, and have the team, manage to those parameters and those expectations. A simple example, Ross, and you and I have been talking about this a lot, which is kind of what I'm doing today and tomorrow, is it like account planning. And what's really interesting, and I've been doing this a long time, and when you have to present your territory plan or present your account plan to management, I'm pretty sure over the last 30 years, every time I've had to do that, or every time somebody's had to do that, they moan and complain that, oh my God, I got to do this next Thursday, and it's creating a lot of work. And then you talk to them next Thursday afternoon, and you're like, you know what? That was a really good use of time. It gave me my blind spots. It gave me my, and one of the guys I used to work with, he goes, you know what it's like, Jim? He goes, it's like a truth pill. You take a truth pill. And I think as a salesperson who's great, you take a truth pill every day. And I used to say to this one person who used to present, I said, hey, listen, if you don't know the answer, tell me you don't know the answer. At least then we can go find the answer. And so I love the perpetual planning motion. And I love when organizations have that as a kind of an ongoing kind of activity. The other thing I think it does is it, and this morning, like I had my top person present their account plan, and you can see this is their top person, by the way, and you can see areas where you can actually help, right? When you ask the right questions, when you can see that person have a blind spot, and it's not a criticism, it's not a gap, it's nothing other than it's another person putting their gray matter to your problem and thinking about it from a constructive perspective as opposed to any other type of perspective. So I'm a big believer in planning and then questioning that plan. Like, okay, how are you going to do that? Because there is a lot of motherhood and apple pie kind of statements in these sessions, right? And then the other thing which I think separates phenomenal teams versus other teams, especially as you get longer or kind of more tenured in your career, is begin the process of thinking big earlier in your career. Like, so today again, like we're going through one thing and this person's talking about doing this task and then this task and then this task. I'm like, how could you put all that together? Like, what's the value proposition for that customer if you put all of that together? Because senior executives in large organizations are probably more apt to sign a $9 million opportunity than they are to sign a 90K opportunity. and so I just, thinking big, being curious, setting the guardrails, questioning it, and know that as a sales person, the genre of being a salesperson is like being a stand-up comedian. And if you look at a stand-up comedian today versus that exact same stand-up comedian 25 years ago, who's better? Same genre, by the way, same brain, everything's the same. But the person's delivery, his articulation, their way they look at things, their insightfulness, right? The premise, right? Their opinion, it's all very different. And I look at sales as this beautiful genre that you can always get better at. But you just have to, if you're going to be a seller, if you're going to be a stand-up comedian, you got to practice every day. And you're always thinking about kind of creating and honing your craft. So that was a long answer to a short question, but I think I follow along pretty similarly to what Pat was saying about setting the parameters, setting the guardrails, setting the example, and then kind of delivering on expectations.
Like, Pat, are you gonna jump in with something?
I'm trying to think of all the bad jokes I've told in sales meetings where I thought I was a stand-up comedian and they all fell super flat. But I agree. I think, Jim, we see the world very similarly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what really resonated in the chat there, Denise jumped in. I think that culture of improvement, I think the things that I hear from the best revenue leaders that they instill with their team is the adaptability, is the safe space to have those questions. I think something that I learned from Stripe, which was they brought from an engineering culture and product culture, not sales, was this idea of like hyper collaboration and transparency internally on deals, where you would ask someone beside you to proofread an email or a basic deck. Like, it was just unlike any sales team that I've seen or heard. Someone's just going to have a different perspective. I've been seeing it like this and opening it up. And I think that's, again, from very much the kind of like product and engineering worlds, where it's super low ego. It's about the right thing, not that it was my idea. And I think it's this kind of like tension with sales, which like very hard charging. It's all about the number. I'm going to get it done because this is the thing. And you're going to get paid, at least half of your paycheck on it, even at the highest levels, to, okay, how do I bridge that with, there's other people I can work with on the deal. And I think it takes a very unique leader and culture to build around the intensity and urgency and performance with the collaboration and being open to, like, in my perspective is you're always wrong because you're never at perfect. you can always get better, right? Like every pitch, everything, there's always a gap. And being open to
What
that, having that culture, I think is very challenging
look at
to build.
I'd respond to Denise also this way, right? So first of all, I think it's actually an incredible ask / insight, but I'm a firm believer, and I espouse making thoughtful decisions. And what would be a beautiful thing, Denise, is if you came to me or you came to your manager and said, "Hey, this is what I'm faced with. Here are our options. Here's what I think." And it's not just, "Hey, here's what I'm faced with. What do you think?" It's, "Hey, here's what we're faced with. These are the types of things I'm thinking about. This is what happens if we do one. This is what happens if we do two. This is what happens if we do three." And then collectively, you make a decision. Okay, Denise, let's try number two. Or what's the risk of number two? And then you walk through it and you talk through it, and I think that builds up that muscle memory, right? So you're automatically taking that thought process one or two steps further than you perhaps would. And because I think, you're obviously trying to improve yourself because you're on this Zoom today. So I think, that in and of itself is half the battle, but it's just my advice is make thoughtful decisions, vet those decisions with your sales leader. And something tells me that they're gonna walk alongside you 99% of the time. And if you fail, that's okay. They've been with you. They're gonna fail too. So that would be my response to that.
Well, maybe shifting gears. So we talked a bit about what high performance means, which we talked about both this kind of balance of the very binary outcomes of sales and kind of what great looks like for these teams. But I think the age-old question is it the right people or is it the process and culture? I'd be really curious to kind of maybe to start with everyone's answer. What percentage is the right hiring, the right people in the role versus the right culture and process? And maybe it changes based on the stage. So maybe picking an example of the stage that you're at or kind of where you have most experience, and what percentage do you think the thing that matters most is the right people versus the right process? Kojo, if you wanna start, curious to get your take on this. As someone who thinks a lot about, early stage investing in the people side, how much is that them building the right process and culture, just hiring great people?
I'm always biased towards, people, um, uh, with a caveat, and I'll explain the caveat in a second. We see a lot of folks from the very early stages where it's just the founder, and the founder is trying to sell a product, right? And oftentimes there's not a whole lot of process there. They're winging it. They're just trying to, just survive and thrive by their own wit, and there's not a whole lot of process. Um, at least that's what it looks like from the outside. But it turns out that whatever you're doing as you're winging it will have vestigial remains long after you've hired a ton of salespeople. So I know I said, I tend to bias towards the people, but I'm sure a lot of you have been hired into teams where there's already a founder who's done some sales, and you probably were the first person, especially if you were the first person, or in the case of Pat, if you were a co-founder, you've probably had to do some cleanup. You've probably had to just do some convincing that there's some need for some process. So that's what I mean by there's a caveat there. There's always someone's just view of the world that impacts whatever process that you've put in place. And those two things are typically kind of in conversation. I don't really think of them as being in tension, but you're in conversation and you settle on some kind of happy medium that takes into account people's personality and takes into account, just established processes. Once your organization scales, though, I do think that it becomes a lot more outcomes become a lot more influenced by process. But at the early stages, I think the outcomes are very, very skewed towards the people. And a lot of those personalities get encoded into processes, and then over time, those processes mature and become kind of influenced by sales leaders, some of whom I'm sure are on this call and have been hired to help do some cleanup and do some reorganization.
Totally. Yeah, maybe the next stage, Pat, kind of the founder stuff to, building out the team. Yeah, is that a similar perspective, or what's your take on
I
it?
totally agree. And of course, I feel beholden on behalf of founders everywhere. I apologize to the sales leaders who have to come in and kind of clean up the profoundly ugly slides we had and the potentially the over promising we did on the front end. No, as Kojo was talking in my brain, I was thinking of just a simple kind of time percentage graph, and it's like early stage people is the priority, and or the dependent variable, or really the area in which you can't absorb risk. You got to find somebody who can just get from A to B on stuff. And Kojo, to your point, oftentimes that's a founder or a very early sales employee with kind of founder tendencies or founder potential, him or herself. And in process, you can get away with winging it. And then as kind of time elapses, those paths converge so that there's effectively, I think, equal balance. And I like that phrasing of those are in conversation with each other, because the reality is this: you find fantastic people who are, outcome oriented. You rightly need to be open-minded to the fact that they can and should have influence on what that process should be over time. And the way that we sell now that we're 100 firms and growing really quickly is very different than when we sold when we were 50 firms, right? And like that process, people hear process and they think like stasis, or they think like strict constraint. And like process is just like a baseline. It's like, it's a stupid analogy, and I'm not a musician, but I was thinking of like process is like the baseline in jazz, and then like the execution, the closing of deals, that's like the trumpet solo. It's like you set this like steady like drum beat or bass beat, and that allows people to then go out and kind of be fluid in their execution, and then maybe it's a whole new song. So the two are in constant, I think, complementary conversation. But I'll tell you, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. Hiring great people that match like the stage of your company, that is, I have not cracked the code on that. If anybody can give advice in the chat, I'd love to hear it, because it is hard to find. I take a very objective view. It's like there are these moments in time. There's the arc of a company, there's the arc of someone's career, and sometimes they match up and it's just perfect marriage. And sometimes it's like great person, great company, and it just ain't a fit. And we've all seen that before. And it's nobody's fault. It just is. And nobody's figured out the science on how to perfectly land the plane there. Or if they have, I haven't read their book yet. So constant learning.
Totally. And Jim, what's your take as someone that has maybe more experience on the cleanup and the kind of, okay, we got maybe the product developing, and how do we take this from 10 to 100 or 100 to 1,000?
It's such a great question. I look at it, I'll answer it this way. I think the IT, I'll use IT as just as the industry here perspective. The IT industry is littered with organizations that had a good product or a great product and very poor sales execution. And then you also look at organizations that had an okay product and exceptional sales execution. Two that come to mind, quite frankly, not to be belligerent, but it's like SAP. You look at EMC, what they were able to do right now, different times, different markets, but created an enterprise sales motion that crushed. Now, it's really tough so then the question is, okay, which in that motion, who's more important, or what's more important, the salesperson or the execution or the motion? And they are both, right? The answer is kind of both, because you need that person to execute. I was in the Formula One this past weekend. I actually asked the Aston Martin driver. I was doing a Q&A with him. I said, "What's more important, the driver or the car?" Right? And to a person, every one of them said the car.
Really?
Right? I said, I said, so you're telling me that if you take some dude out of AlphaTauri, put him in Max Verstappen's car, and said he's going to win? He goes, yes, he's going to win.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And they had the low ego to say that. That's interesting as a driver. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, he also told me 8 + 2 + 3 was 12, but that's a different issue. Okay, because he was counting number of tires and stuff. But so, but at the same time, Ross, like I look at Accord, quite frankly, right? Accord, I think a significant percentage of Accord's success is probably directly attributable to this guy named Ross, right? But it's because you brought that execution with you, brought that mindset. So you've incorporated the capability, and you've incorporated this sales process and sales methodology into you being you, and you having the curiosity and the drive and that, kind of that hustle, right? So it's a shitty answer perhaps, right? But I think the answer is both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the maturity of your organization, it probably, I think you might have said it, Pat, actually, where less mature, it's probably more on the person. And then as the company and product matures, it has to do the methodology, and the process begins to weigh more into that, kind of into that cycle. So it's a bit of it. Maybe I cheated on the answer there, but that's kind of how I feel.
No, I think that's kind of where we're netting out, which is earlier we need to figure stuff out. It's making stuff up as you go, and the intuition from people, and then later you need that process, and that can be a competitive advantage in and of itself at a company. And Brian just said, you can only find so many players. That's kind of the next question, which is, why is it
but
always
again,
feel like you're hunting for those
no,
people?
but you're right. You can only get so many A players. There are only going to be so many Kobe Bryants, right? Or whatever the right sports analogy is. But Ross, you and I were talking about this before, right? And it's the basketball coach had Coach K had a quote. I'll let you say it, but what is the quote?
Yeah, it's not about setting rules, it's about enforcing standards. And that's kind of the whole ethos behind Accord. Is it's not the binary, this is the thing you need to do. It's about having a clear set of, this is what, like we're talking about, this is what high performance looks like on our team. And people can,
and so just there's this beautiful, and I think one of the old time basketball coaches actually taught his players how to put their socks on. Right, because if they put their socks on a certain way, it would reduce the friction in their feet and their shoes, which reduced injuries and blah blah blah. And I love that analogy. But yes, you're not going to find 12 A players. You won't, right? There aren't 12 Messis on a soccer pitch, right? But there are people that help Messi get the ball, and there are the people that defend against the other team or whatnot. So it is a team sport for sure, and I also believe that it is it's the setting of expectations and setting of standards, right? Did you send your follow-up email to the CIO within 1 hour after the meeting, or 3 days after the meeting, or did you send one? Right. And so it's just this expectation, the bias to action, the curiosity, having an opinion. I think all of that stuff is just so important.
Yeah, I think and Jim, tying back to Pat's point around some people and the timing and like, I think you can expand the percentage of people that can be successful at your company if you have very clear standards. And that's where I think it comes to, is like, what percentage of people can be A players or B players on your team based on that culture and the standards that you're setting, and you helping them do that. And that's kind of where I've netted out with this, is like, people coming with, it's usually not the skill, it's usually the will. And so how can you help that subset of people that you're able to bring to your organization be successful? And that like comes down to, when you talk about the EMCs, the PTCs, the Salesforces, even all this stuff, the Oracles, like why were they able to scale this really well, is they were super dialed with the process. They could have a lot of people come in and be hyper successful. And I think we make this as an excuse as a startup, and I've definitely done this before. And even with building Accord, like, it's so hard at the beginning to say, this is the way we do things, or this is what's going to make you successful, but you're not able to scale your team until you do that. And so it's this tough balance of how much process do we have? So I think we got 3 or so minutes left. If you have any questions for this group before we jet, please add them to the Q&A or the chat here. But to close things out, I'm just looking at the list of great questions that we wrote before. Maybe let's hit on the culture side of things. We talked a lot about people. We talked a lot about process. Actually, no, great question here, Jeff. We'll hit this. The audience always has way better questions than we come up with. Where do you, as sales leaders, talking about A players, talking about this stuff, how do you think about identifying that talent, right? It's the best leaders do find the best people. Maybe we'll wrap things up and talk about talent. How do you think about finding the best leaders or sellers?
One of
Kojo,
the
go for it.
one of the questions I ask myself a lot, and I ask other folks kind of in our orbit is the best sales talent product agnostic, right? So it's a classic. If you took someone who's done enterprise sales for a database company, can they sell an application software product? And I think this goes back to the Lionel Messi kind of sports analogy. If the sport is the same, and you have the right processes, you should be able to take a player and have them go to another team, right? And I think the variables that matter there are things like coaching and things like, how is the team collaborating? To answer the question specifically, I think one way that I think about top talent is that it is actually product agnostic. I think some folks that I meet tend to be so focused on, I am a salesperson for CRM software, and I only ever want to do CRM software. And I got laid off from my previous job, and I'm only looking for jobs in this category. And I think that some of the, best salespeople I've met and I've worked with in the past did not come from the industry, right? And so one way that I think about finding sales talent is sometimes you probably better off going and finding someone who's in a totally sleepy industry and is totally crushing it and killing it and might be a really great fit, again, with the right processes and with the right collaboration frameworks around. So anyway, I tend to look a lot for that transferability of skills and that ability to learn quickly when I think about where to find good talent.
I love that. And I totally agree that the best, broaden your horizons. I do think that that's been a challenge. A lot of people I've talked to that have recently been laid off with all the pressure from the market is like, be more open to stuff, get the right company, the right people, the right culture, forget about exactly what you did before. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for people to change things up a bit. But Jim, how do you think about finding the right people?
I mean, so to answer Jeff's question specifically, where do I go? I go to my peers, actually. I'll go to Ross. Matter of fact, I think I've asked you 2 or 3 times right this year, and vice versa. So I'll go to my peers. That's the first thing, Jeff, I'll do. And then I'll kind of look, obviously I'll go to LinkedIn but to Kojo's point as well, I look for people that have had sustained success. And I love when they've had their own company, when they've had sustained success in 2 or 3 different industries. And what I mean by sustained success is, not, 18, 24 months at a place, right? But that have been somewhere for, say, 6 or 7 years or 5 or 6 years. And then, they were at a database company, and then they had, 5 or 6 years at, a virtualization. And then they had 5 or 6 years. Now, granted, that's all of a sudden we're getting old now. But I do like, I believe curiosity and having an opinion is not, specific to a vertical or industry, right? Or technology, right? Curiosity, hard work, and determination, those are all interchangeable. So, even if I look at my own career, started off with, in product marketing, then I went to digital, I sold semiconductors, like, Google, if you have a curiosity and you just keep asking why and how is that good for my customer and so what, the more times you ask so what when somebody's presenting to you, I think the better off you'll be long term in your sales career.
Totally. Yeah, the network definitely makes a big difference there. So yeah, reconnect with people, grab a coffee, all that kind of stuff. I think that's where the best opportunities come from. But Pat, to round us off, how do you think about finding great talent?
Admittedly, I don't have a formula because, 2 years ago, I would have said I do not go through recruiters, but we found some fantastic talent through kind of unsolicited submissions. I get the random cold emails from recruiters. Hey, I got this great new AE who just transitioned out of the company. Here's some stats. Do you want to talk to him or her? And that's worked out for us. I am like Jim, where my tried and true bias has been, if I've got an open gig I need to fill, I look to my peers and network either in Charlotte or, we're a Bessemer portfolio company. So we have a fantastic community of go-to-market leaders. I can consult there. I've gotten some good referrals. How we found our VP of marketing, actually. And then I actually ask our team as well, current AEs, hey, Thomas, love what you're doing. Where's the next you? Do you got any buddies who are like you? Because we got to fill a gig. Or thirdly, I do not go and poach from competitors, but I do keep an eye on people who work for competitors or peer companies in our space. And if I recognize, hey, their LinkedIn changed, they're, taking a hiatus or whatever it may be, or if they come to us by going to a lot of events, and this gets more into our go-to-market strategy, but we do a ton of events. We get to know a lot of people. I have found that people who kind of that know our space a little bit are able to kind of transfer in. So in effect, known entities or referred entities tend to be the best fits that I've found. But again, hell, I've not cracked the code on this. And I think the challenge, and this goes back to phasing, and when you're early stage, I had a board member who framed it as like, listen, you got to be a pirate until you're ready to be part of the Navy. Early stage, you got to have some people who are a little bit more romantic, artistic, free flowing. It's a very different profile when you're selling as a $1 million a year top line company than when you get to 20, 30, 50 million. The profiles may not map. So you got to be prepared to, I guess, adapt your model as you grow as well for the profile of person you want to bring in.
Yeah, love it. And I think maybe the point that really resonates with me that you made is the people that are the best are the people that are out there. They're known, and like people have connected with them. You've seen them at things, like the people that make it happen regardless. They're in the market, connectors, all that kind of stuff, especially in sales. So yeah, this was awesome. I know go for it.
Well, I was going to say, so Denise, to your question, do you have any recommended networking spaces? For what it's worth, I know people who swear by Pavilion, and I've had some success there in the past, both with kind of their CRO circles, but also their job boards as well. So Pavilion, I know, is one that jumps out.
Yeah, love Pavilion. Hang out with old colleagues though, people that you thought were excellent. Get into their networks. Like that's what I found. Just the one-to-one. Like it pays off, and not a lot of people are doing it. And I think the cream rises to the top with that, and just ask people who else, and that adds up very quickly over a couple of years. But I know we're a bit over time. Awesome discussion. Huge thank you, Kojo, Jim, Pat, for taking time out of your busy days to kind of share your learnings and have this conversation with the community and folks that jumped in on the chat. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I got a lot of things to think about too with our process and people stuff, and hopefully everyone out there listening does as well. We can all learn, right?
Ross,
Excellent.
thanks.
Great to see you all.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Ross.
Take it easy, everyone. Bye-bye.